Hey you guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking about taking the Texas rig and adapting it for late spring and early summer bass fishing. How to Texas rig some different worms, different creature baits, and when those different baits work best. The Texas rig is at the heart of bass fishing. I mean, it truly is the core of bass fishing. If you're a bass fisherman, you need to know how to Texas rig. It's something we use almost every day. You might be throwing a weightless Senko, Texas rigged. You might be punching heavy cover with a Texas rig. You might be fishing big worms on outside structure in the heart of summer on a Texas rig. You might be BFS fishing, ultralight tackle with the Texas rig. It really is one of those truly core techniques. So what I've done today is I've broken the idea of Texas rigging into 5 categories, and I want to talk to you about the differences. So we've got fishing worms, curly tail worms, we've got stick baits, we've got traditional creatures, baits that have some movement to them. And then we've got what I would call dead action baits, or baits that are more about profile than movement. And then we've got the tiny guys. And for each one of those categories, I'm going to cover some of the baits that I like in that category. I'm going to show you exactly how I rig that category, the different hook, different size weight, whether or not I peg, that sort of thing. And then why? Because in each one of these categories, I've got 1 or 2 of those baits that just seem to be magic. I just seem to always be able to catch fish on them for whatever reason. So I want to give you a few of those tidbits, a few of those key baits along the way as well. So right out the gate, what is a Texas rig? Let's take it back to basics for just a second here. Here is a Texas rig. So essentially we've got a weight on the line, okay? A worm weight or a flipping weight. It can be pegged or unpegged. These are pegs. You slide one of these onto the line before you put your weight on, and you can slide it down and hold it all in place so that it can't move. And then I've got my hook and my creature bait in this case. I typically use wide gap hooks. That's personal preference. Other people use different styles of worm hooks or flipping hooks. I really like wide gap hooks. So today that's what you're going to be seeing. But that right there, that's a mid-size brush hog on a 4/0 Superline EWG with a 1/2 ounce worm weight on it. About as generic and universal as it could possibly get. This is something that I could pitch up around cover. I could throw it out deep and drag it. I can hop it, I can shake it, I can run it over a rock pile or throw it in a tree or down through grass. I could throw it anywhere. It really is at the heart of bass fishing. So let's kick it off with those traditional type creature baits, baits that have got some movement. I'll show you some of my favorite baits. I just showed you how I rig them. But I've got one in particular that I've got a little trick for. So let's start here. I grabbed 4 baits in this category, and you don't need all these baits in any of these categories, okay? 1 or 2 is gonna carry you through most things, but I'm gonna walk you through the baits that I like in each category and why. So the first one was that mid-size brush hog. You just saw it. I have to talk about a brush hog. The brush hog, if we're talking creature baits, you know, that's sort of the core of that category. One thing about a brush hog, and I've taught this a time or 2, but just in case you haven't seen it, a brush hog is a pretty basic bait, but a lot of people don't realize that there's a right and a wrong way to rig it. If you take it and turn it around, it looks like it's universal. You could rig it either side up. Not the case. See these flaps? They're not poured evenly. So if I take it and run it one way over my finger, the flaps want to close. See that? They shut. So there's less action. The other way, they want to flare open every time it goes over a piece of cover. See the difference? Flares open, shuts. You want to rig it so that it will flare open. So I want the open to be up. So I take my hook, run it in through the top about a 1/4 inch, pop it out the side, bring it all the way up, turn it around. Then I like to poke it through because I'm using a wide gap. And then I grab that meat and I pull it up and just barely skin hook it, okay? Now, again, I've rigged it so it wants to open every time it goes over a piece of cover. There is a right and a wrong way to rig a brush hog. You will get more bites if you rig it that way. Next bait, this is a man bear pig. Reaction Innovations, funny name obviously. Similar overall profile, but this is one of those baits that just seems to have that something special. I pull these, break them off so I have a little more movement there. The rest of it, good to go. Texas rig it the same way, and I fish that bait. But I don't know why the man bear pig works so well, but it just does. It's just one of those baits, if I'm fishing in that category, I reach for a man bear pig before I reach for a brush hog, personally. I just have a lot of confidence in that bait. Next one, net bait Paca Slim. The 4-inch net bait Paca Slim. That bait, less of a creature, more of a craw, but a ton of movement. Those claws kick on the way down. So if I'm dragging it along bottom, I lean more to the creature style bait. But if I'm flipping it into cover, letting it fall down in holes, maybe I'm throwing up to dock pilings and letting it fall, the kick becomes a big factor. So more dragging, I lean to that traditional creature. More pitching and letting it fall, I want that kick. Last but not least is the crazy flapper here, and that's the one that I've got a little something different for you. Typically, I peg my Texas rigs. Most of the time, I put a peg on there so everything stays nice and compact and falls quickly. That's usually what I like. But this bait, this is almost like early origin of the free rig right here. Now, the weight doesn't fall anywhere near as quickly, but the concept extremely similar. So this thing shows up like this. You gotta break this one off, separate the two main ones, okay? Now they're all separated. This thing has more movement coming through the water. So there's a Kitech Crazy Flapper. This is the largest size. You either want to use the largest or the medium. This bait, I run it on a 4/0 hook, the big one, or a 3/0 for the medium, not a super line, a regular wire Gamakatsu EWG, okay? Texas rigged, same deal, skin hooked, but in front of it, take this little guy right here. That is an 1/8 ounce tungsten worm weight, 1/8 ounce. And I run it in front there with no peg. I fish this when bass are up under docks. If you're on a shaky head bite, if you're catching them on finesse jigs, if you're skipping under docks with reaction baits, if you know they're on docks and it gets tough, this is magic. So what I meant when I said it was almost like an early free rig, what I do is I fish it unpegged and I throw that up there, okay? Now the weight doesn't shoot to bottom, but that 1/8 ounce will head to bottom, and because the bait has so much kick, it totally stalls out and lets that weight get way ahead. And then this swims down almost weightless behind it. And up against pilings, it's unbelievable how well it works. It's one of those little magic tricks that I held on to for years and years. It was just post-spawn, early summer, fish like to suck up in that shade on a hot day, and I knew that I could rig this exact setup up, pitch it up on every piling on a dock, and if there's a good one under there, I'm going to catch them. And again, I'll link all this stuff in the video description. Today's video description is going to be very, very full. Very full. But I will do my best to get all of it in there for you. Let's talk weightless, because that's a really simple one, okay? In this category, the Senko is king. So, 5-inch Senko, I rig on a 3/0 Superline EWG. 6-inch Senko, I rig on a 4/0 Superline EWG. Now, again, you could throw them on a regular worm hook. You could use different hooks for them. I really prefer that EWG style hook. Personal preference. But 3/0 and 4/0. And then I just throw it up against cover and just leave slack and just let it fall, and I just watch my line. If you see a hop in the line, if you see it start to take off, set the hook. You don't need to reel up and check if there's a fish there. If your line is running away, there is a fish there. Just jack them. So again, completely weightless, rigged on that same style hook. Just throw it out and just let it fall. It's that simple. The weightless is easy. Now let's talk big worms, then we'll talk sort of dead action and punching and flipping, and then we'll get into the little guys. And that is one that I want you to make sure you stick around and listen to, because it's really unique. Now, big worms. The thing about big worms is big worms catch big fish. This time of year especially, all the way into summer, they do. As soon as you get into the post-spawn, bass eat worms. It's not always the most fun fishing. It's not always the most technical fishing, but it works. You can Carolina rig them. You can do different things with them. But I like to Texas rig them. So the baseline in that category, sort of like the brush hog is to creature baits, the Zoom old monster is to that curly tail worm, right? That's that baseline. Oh, I need to get on a worm bite? Oh, grab a Zoom old monster. It'll catch them. My color, June bug. June bug, candy bug, practically the same thing. A June bug worm will get a big bite. I'm typically going to throw these worms on a 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce flipping weight or worm weight, but I like the shape of a flipping weight. I think it matches up better to the top of that worm personally. Maybe I can hold them here where you can see it. I like the shape of a flipping weight more. Back over here. This had a worm weight on it. So there's a worm weight and there's a flipping weight. See the difference? One's a little more fat and the neck's down, and the other one's kind of even the whole way. So 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce worm or flipping weight, and then typically about a 5/0 Superline type hook. Now you can put a really big hook in these worms, they'll take them, but the smaller the hook, the more action that worm has, and I just seem to do better. And if they vacuum that thing up, if they really eat it, they've got it. Because it's not much body to that worm. Now here's the second worm. This is a net bait C-Mac. Okay, so when I get into this category, I like this one a little bit more, but both are great. I mean, you can crush them on an old monster, you can crush them on a C-Mac, but you take this guy, so here's a wide gap hook again. And I'll show you what I mean. Even though this is an 11-inch worm, it's a big worm. Once that's rigged up, the body itself is not very big, right? So the bigger this hook gets, it just starts looking goofy and it screws up the action of the bait. So 3/8 to a 1/2 ounce. I only go heavier if it's, you know, really windy or super deep water or current, where I have to go heavier. That lighter weight, I just do better. And then I like to put a peg on there, just so I'm more connected as I come through cover, because usually I'm fishing these worms either on the outside of structure. So say this is going to be for fish that have gone deep. So outside points, rock piles, humps, those sorts of areas where I'm sitting still and I'm throwing to something and I'm working the bait up and through it. I like to throw up on a rock pile and just slowly pull it through the rocks. We get really big bites doing that, especially with June bug. I'm telling you, it is a thing. They love that color. And then the last one is this guy right here. This is a Kitech, the Mad Wag Long. The Mad Wag comes in a few different versions. I like the long. That's the 8-inch. It's got a lot of action when you pull it across the bottom. A lot of action. And I've done really, really well with it. Again, June bug. I mean, you can do great with red bug. You can do great with green pumpkin. But I always start with June bug. That is my baseline for the pattern. All right, moving over here to more of the flipping type technique. Okay, so now we're talking heavy cover. Around heavy cover, I tend to use baits that have less movement if I'm up in shallow water. The deeper the water gets, the more I revert back to like a pack of slim, where it'll kick on its way down. If it's got more than about 3 or 4 feet to fall, I like kick. But if I'm up shallow, you know, a lot of times when you start flipping heavy cover this time of year, that fish they'll get right up tight underneath that junk in just a foot or two of water. And for that, I really prefer baits that fall quickly. They don't have little appendages that get caught up on everything. So they punch right through, and then it's a great profile. It lands in front of the fish or they eat it on the way down. It's just a reaction bite. So I don't worry too much about action. First one is going to be, again, talking about a baseline, the Reaction Innovations Beaver. That guy right there. Typically for this pattern, I'm using a 4/0 or a 5/0. This is the Owner Jungle Wide Gap. And then this is that new one they have, that Haymaker, where it's tipped up specifically for punching. Just a nasty, nasty hook. It will get them. But this style hook, the Haymaker is like a best of both worlds. So it's a wide gap hook, but it'll set in this bait like a flipping hook. Okay, so there's the 4/0 Haymaker. 4/0 Haymaker in that Reaction Innovations Beaver. And then here we're actually talking about flipping. So flipping or punching, I want you to go with as little weight as possible, but it's still going to be a lot of weight. Probably 3/4 ounce at a minimum to consistently get through cover. If you've got just junk and slop that you're trying to get through, 3/4 will do it. If we start talking about primrose and hyacinth and thick cheese, we might be talking about an ounce, 1.5 ounces, even 2 ounces. That's 1.5 ounces there, sitting on top of that bait. And then again, always peg it for this technique, because you want it to go through the cover as a single unit. And again, not a lot of appendages to get caught up on things. It'll fly right through. It'll punch right through. So baseline is that Beaver. All right, next one up here is Tim's personal favorite. This is the Big Bite BFE. Again, it's about profile, not a lot of action, but I have watched Tim just crush. He caught a monster, an absolute monster on it when we were fishing together in Florida last year. The tilapia color is his go-to color in this one. He just swears by that guy right there. but just a really, really good bait and a really good profile. Another one, 13 Fishing, the rabbit ear, the Invader. Let me pull one of these out. This guy has a little bit of kick, but not much. It's just about profile. Again, we want baits that will slip through the cover easily without catching up on things. If you start taking, you know, a brush hog or a man bear pig where it's got those long appendages, they get caught up on things, they wrap around and they get hung up. And it'll cause a lot of problems. You want these baits where everything about them looks good, but they don't have big arms and legs sticking out everywhere. And then the last one is this big bite flying squirrel. It's got more of that traditional creature look. Separate those arms. But see how it has straight tails instead of curly tails? This is a bait that will go right in and out of cover, and it's one of the only creature type baits that will do it like that without having a bunch of arms and causing problems. Same deal, 3/0 or 4/0 hook. This one you don't want to throw a 5/0, it's just too slim of a profile. But what's cool about this bait, this is the one I really wanted to get to. See these little bulbous ends on the two tails? Those float. So when I punch that thing through cover and it hits bottom, that will stand it up. And I have done really, really well with this. I've caught, in particular, 2 really big largemouth pitching one of these in and around cover. It's just one of those baits that doesn't look like much in the hand, but you see it in the water, you see it stand up, and I've seen it in the mouth of some giant fish. And that brings us to our very last category, which is the tiny little baits, which I just think is so cool. You know, BFS has really begun to take off in the US. It was huge in Japan for years, but that's bait finesse, where you're fishing little tiny baits on bait casters. But you could absolutely do this with spinning gear too. But when people think Texas rig, they don't traditionally think tiny little baits. This is something I got into last year. So a 1/16, can you even see it? A 1/16 ounce little flipping weight and a size 1 wide gap hook. So these are the 2 I use, the rigging hook and the J light. The rigging hook is stronger, the J light is lighter wire. So it just depends on if I'm in cover or just pulling it in open water. They float up a little bit better on the J light. I can lean on them with the rigging hook. When I'm throwing this little micro Texas rig, it's truly like I'm flipping. I use a peg above my 1/16 ounce weight and my little size 1 hook, and then I use little tiny creature baits. I'm typically using either 7 or 8 pound fluorocarbon. It's amazing. But there's this trick. If you hook a bass on 65 pound braid and try to force them out of heavy cover, they will fight you with everything they have. But if you hook them and then just keep a little bit of tension, they will do their best to swim to open water. Now, obviously, if you've gone through a hole and they go out the bottom, you got to get them back up there. You got a problem. But if you're just fishing around cover, if you stick those fish and don't try and bulldog them, 7 or 8 pound fluoro on either spinning or BFS, and you just sort of lean back and just apply a little pressure, they will naturally come up and out, and I very rarely break them off. So 3 baits that I used with this style is really cool. The first one, TRD Craws, Z-Man TRD Craws. Think craw profile, okay? So that guy right there, a true craw profile, rigged on that little size 1 hook, is money. And I fish this around cover. You know, if the fish are in wood or under docks, pilings, that sort of thing, There it is, rigged up on a little size 1 hook. Sits perfectly in there. I'm not messing around. I do this a lot. If you guys watch the videos, you've seen me do it. I love this. Number 2, Z-Man TRD Bugs. This is like a beaver type profile, just totally downsized compared to these bigger baits. Same exact thing, rig it on that size 1. This one I like to throw into cover. So if they're in wood, if they're on the edges of grass, I'll pitch right in there, just like it's a big creature bait on heavy tackle, and then just lead them out. And then the last one is a Molix. I started playing with this one last year. This is the Freaky Flex. And when I bought it, I didn't even realize how tiny it was. I bought it thinking it was a full-size creature. They got here and I was disappointed. And then I thought, you know, I've got a way to fish that. And it worked great. I caught the fire out of them with it. So this guy, when you get into these little micro profiles, it's generally about profile more than it is action. But this guy has these 2 little ball legs on him. See those? The little balls on there? And those balls kick as you're falling. So it's a micro version of a true kicking creature type bait. So I use all 3 of these interchangeably. The craw around the outer edges, and I'm flipping with either the bugs or that little Molix right there. But I've done really well on all 3. And it's just a fun, downsized version of this entire thing. It's just one more application of a Texas rig, and it works really well when nothing else will. Again, guys, the Texas rig is incredibly universal. You can do so many things with it. It's amazing how much you can adapt it to different situations, and it's something that I really enjoy doing. So I wanted to give you some of those key baits from the different categories so that you could go out there late spring, early summer, and fish with confidence. Hopefully this video helped you. Again, I will link everything down in the video description in the order that it appeared. If there's room, I'll link you some rods as well. But we might run out of room with this one. We'll see. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.